I'm Bill Lee, Governor of Tennessee, and honored to co-chair this very important committee that has been working hard for the last couple of years on pandemic response, and particularly, and what we'll be talking about today is cybersecurity and the importance of it. But let me start by, is Governor Lamont on the Zoom with us?
Good to see you. Sorry I'm not there in person with you, but when it comes to pandemic and disaster response, we have a little disaster up here in New England with about a foot of snow, which we're working our way through, and hopefully I get an opportunity to be with you tomorrow, weather permitting. But Bill and I have been had the opportunity to help co-lead this. We have an amazing panel that we're happy to share with you. One is old friend of mine, R.P. Eddy, wrote a book some years ago that was somewhat predictive. 5 years ago, thinking about the type of catastrophes we ought to be able to anticipate in the future. He didn't have snowstorms in there, but he did have pandemic and cyber attacks. And I paid special attention to cyber attacks back then because I come out of the world of information technology, and that's our focus today. I think it's a great panel we got, Bill. I love the fact that we've got a partner with the federal government here. We got from Homeland Security just the other day the Cyber Incident Resource Guide. What we need from the federal government is resources, and they're under the bill. We've got $1 billion over 4 years for cyber, which is greatly appreciated. A big push from our committee and the NGA. Just as importantly, we need best practices from around the country, what other states are doing, what we can learn from each other going forward. And thirdly, what we need in terms of intelligence and sharing of intelligence, and giving us a little bit of early intel in terms of the types of things we might need. And, Bill and I have also been working on a regional basis with our other governors. We've tried to do that here in Connecticut as well, just because, like a pandemic and a snowstorm, cyber does not respect any state borders. So we're trying to initiate as best we can across our borders as well, knowing that utilities and others are all topics and targets of attack, and they do not know any state borders. Thirdly, I can tell you that we're working closely with the corporate community, and I love the fact that we have some corporate leaders here as well. I think that, again, cyber attacks don't know public, nonprofit, corporate. These attacks, go after us. What I've tried to do here in the state of Connecticut is, coming out of an IT background, is change the nature of how we look at this. We have a major commissioner called the Department of Administrative Services. They oversee IT and purchasing. Usually we have a mayor or a wonderful state senator in that job. I came in with a 12-year IBM executive and followed up with that with a chief information officer that came out of Accenture and has been with us for almost 10 years now, trying to bring the best of the private sector along with us. We've got a guy named Jeff Brown. He's our, cybersecurity expert who, hopefully works, closely with Jen as time to come. He comes out of the finance world. Finance has to take a real lead when it comes to protecting the most valuable of data, and we wanted to take that, into our orbit as well. And one of the things we tried to do is reform a really antique IT system. A lot of it sort of standalone, not speaking to each other. And as we continue to upgrade our IT system, cybersecurity is front and center of what we're trying to do. Get all those old servers out of the closet, move it up to the cloud. There, thankfully, with Microsoft and Amazon on our panel, they have the level of security that we'll never be able to provide at our own local level. So that's why I'm really excited about the nature of this panel, what we got going forward, and how we can work together. Bill, back to you.
We're joined with Governor Carney, Governor Cox, Governor Edwards as well. We're thankful for your help. And this really is an opportunity for governors and states to work together with the federal government. That's what's so valuable about the work that we've done in the last couple of years. And this cyber security issue is certainly something that it touches every aspect of our state's and our country's life. The public, the government, the private sector, we've worked together to, we have worked together as states with the federal government to make sure that we fill in those gaps. Secretary Mayorkas, in our last task force meeting last June, maybe July, he committed to having assistance and to a report for governors on how it is that we can work together with CISA, and we're going to hear about that in a few minutes. In Tennessee, we have created an advisory council that pulls together the private sector, public entities, members of economic development and business to understand the chain that connects all of us in cybersecurity. And we're only as strong as that weakest link in that chain. So recognizing that local governments have an important role to play all the way through to the federal government, that we understand that chain that links us all together for security against attacks, whatever those might look like. We have created one place in our government. It's cybersafetyn.gov. So we have tried to incorporate one spot where we can assimilate information, resources, and we can disseminate that to everyone that's involved in this, from the public all the way through entities, government and or private. The other thing that we have really focused on in our state is the recognition that we really need to advance our workforce development efforts around cybersecurity. So we're working with our Department of Labor, our Department of Education, our Higher Education Commission to create pathways to ensure education in our K-12 and post-secondary institutions that train up cybersecurity workers in every community in our state, because we really have had to, it's been a real struggle to find skilled workers to fill the gap for the enormous need. So part of this conversation and part of the work together is to not only strengthen that chain, but strengthen the workforce that's available to engage in this. So we have a great panel today that knows a whole lot more about this subject than I do anyway, but that we use this expertise to develop our strategy in our states across the country. Mr. R.P. Eddy, I believe he's on maybe remotely.
Yeah, I am, yes.
Chief Executive Officer of Ergo, Ms. Gina Marie Hathaway, Senior Director at Microsoft in the Security and Compliance and Identity component of Microsoft, Ms. Merritt Baer, Principal at Amazon Web Services in the Office of CIO. And we also have Director Jen Easterly of CISA here with us today. CISA is charged with developing the guidance, the implementation guidance on this program that, and I failed to mention, in the infrastructure plan, we have an opportunity across the states to take funding and utilize that across our states and across our agencies to strengthen this cybersecurity piece. So, Director, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks so much,
Thank
Governor.
you.
It's great to be here with everybody, and to include some old friends like RP and our colleagues from industry, Kemba from Microsoft and Merritt from Amazon Web Services. You know, when I first got to the agency, they told me the first thing I need to learn was how to pronounce the name. So it's CISA.
Oh, great.
So,
Thank you.
so just want to,
It's like I said, the experts that know a whole lot more about this than I do.
yeah, that's the one thing I'm expert on
When
is
you've
how
never
to,
been in government, you don't know all the acronyms.
yeah, and it's pretty bad. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. We love security so much we had to have it twice in our name, but we go by CISA. So let me just make a couple comments at the top, and then I would love for this to be an interactive discussion. So before I took this job, I spent about 27 years in the government. I was 21 years in the military as an Army officer. I was at the National Security Agency at the White House. But the most important experience to prepare me to be the director of CISA was the last 4.5 years I spent at Morgan Stanley. And it's interesting, Governor Lamont's comments about the value of understanding how the private sector protects itself, and certainly finance had to get ahead of that because they have to protect the assets in the financial sector. And so that was a really interesting experience. I went there to set up our Cybersecurity Fusion Center, really the center of gravity for cyber defense. And then as that evolved, I ended up being the head of resilience, which really was a recognition. And it's interesting given that this committee is about crisis response and pandemic response, because it's very hard to disaggregate all of the things that can disrupt state, local, private sector, federal government operations, because many of these things are so connected. And I think the pandemic was a great example of that, where you had a global health crisis that in many ways became a cybersecurity crisis, because you saw entrepreneurial cyber threat actors take advantage of the fact that so many people were now working from home in ostensibly less secure environments to threaten people's security and data and privacy. So these things all come together. And we really have to work them together, frankly. And it's not about prevention anymore. It's really about resilience, building a capability to enable us to understand and prepare for and respond to and recover, and then learn from operational disruptions, whether that's cybersecurity or a technology incident or a terrorism or a pandemic or a weather event, to enable us to be more resilient, to ensure the continued operations at all levels of government and business. So, that preparation from the private sector was really terrific to come to CISA, where we're the newest agency in the federal government. We were established at the end of 2018 as the nation's cyber and infrastructure security agency. So our mission is to lead the national effort to understand, manage, and reduce risk to the cyber and digital infrastructure that Americans rely on every hour of every day to get gas at the pump and food from the grocery store and water, their power. These are really the networks and systems that underpin our daily lives. And so we were created to work with our partners to ensure the security and resilience of these networks. And as part of that, we serve a role as the national coordinator for critical infrastructure security and resilience. As opposed to other places in the federal government, in intelligence or the military or counterterrorism, where I spent some time, in the area of cybersecurity, the federal government has no monopoly power. The federal government is just a co-equal partner with industry and with state and local colleagues. And it's why these opportunities to talk about how to strengthen and evolve the partnership is so absolutely critical, and why I'm so glad to be here with our teammates. And so I would just pick up on a few things that Governor Lamont and Governor Lee mentioned, and then hopefully open it up to our partners into a discussion. But we recognize that resources are very precious when it comes to technology, and there's a lot of work to be done, particularly when there is a bunch of legacy technology that has not been updated. And so I'm very excited about the grants that came with the infrastructure bill, the $1 billion, $200 million this year. We've been working very closely with our teammates at FEMA, who administer the grants, and we are managing those programs. We've taken a lot of feedback from our partners at the National Governors Association, as well as the U.S. Conference of Mayors, to make sure that those are built in a way that they can be very helpful to state and local partners as you look to increase the resilience and security of your network. So I'm very excited to get that grant program up and running. Secondly, Governor Lee mentioned the resource guide. We were asked to develop a resource guide coming out of the June meeting, or the July meeting rather, and we released it yesterday. It's the Cyber Incident Resources for Governors. And it's really a resource for governors, but really anyone at the state and local level, to understand how to partner with the federal government when you are facing a major incident. And back to my resilience point, everyone is very likely to face an incident at some point in time. It is increasingly difficult in this highly digitized, highly connected world we live in to prevent a cyber attack from happening. So the more you're prepared for it, the more you're able to respond and recover and mitigate risk and damage to your networks, the better off you'll be. So that resource guide should serve as a very useful capability. But most importantly, we need to exercise those capabilities. We need to come together and plan and ensure that we understand how we all work together in what we call peacetime to be ready for wartime and cyber. And so very important to have that as a resource, but more importantly, to actually operationalize it. With respect to that, one of the great things that we've done over the past 6 months is set up something called the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative, which brings together our technology partners and our state and local partners to help create that visibility of the threat environment. The government does not have all the answers here. Oftentimes, technology like Amazon Web Services or Microsoft may understand what's happening in the environment just because of their presence on global networks. So the idea here was to bring together the biggest cybersecurity companies, the infrastructure companies, and the technology companies to help us create that visibility in the threat environment, and then to work to enable us to plan, exercise against the most serious threats to the nation, and then be able to provide that capability to our state and local partners to be able to tap into. And so you've seen a lot of, hopefully, the resources that we've been putting out on CISA.gov to include stopransomware.gov, which is a one-stop shop for all the information that you would want about what is ransomware, what do I do if I've been hacked, and how do I prevent myself, most importantly, from being hacked. So all of this are informed by those great partnerships. And finally, to the point about workforce, we are doing a lot of work in making sure that we can build diverse pipelines to enable us to develop and strengthen both the cybersecurity workforce of today at all levels of the federal government, at the state and local, and then across the country where we're short about 500,000 cybersecurity jobs. But we're also looking to make sure that we're setting up that next generation of cybersecurity professionals for success, starting very young. I think it's very important to start cybersecurity education really at the K level so that we can start creating knowledge and fluency with how our children can protect themselves on cyber so that they become much more capable of being part of the collective defense of the nation. So with that, I'm happy to turn it back to you, Governor Lee. Thanks for the opportunity.
And I'd like to say along the way as we do this today, questions that you have for each of our panelists would be helpful. So feel free to engage with questions, especially governors. I'll start with one question for you. How is your agency, being a relatively new agency, and there are a lot of other federal agencies that have cybersecurity strategy and their interaction with state government, for example. So how are you working with other agencies to identify other streams of funding that we can use so that we can tap into all the resources that are available to us?
Yeah, so just broadly, what we do that's different from some of the other agencies is we were built to be the nation's cyber defense agency. So we work incredibly closely with our military colleagues. We work incredibly closely with our intel colleagues and, of course, with Federal Bureau of Investigation that does law enforcement and investigations. But we were really focused on how can we help our state and local and our critical infrastructure owners and operators build the resilience that they need to mitigate disruptions from either cyber or physical. So we really are focused on making sure that the grants that we can provide can help to ensure that security and resilience. That $1 billion was terrific, as we know, but there are other, of course, grant opportunities that are available, to include grant opportunities for election security, which we're also responsible for as the sector risk management agencies, and making sure that state and local election officials have the resources and the tools that they need to ensure the integrity of election infrastructure and to maintain confidence in what is certainly the foundation of democracy. But, we work very closely with all of our partners to make sure that at the state and local level, you can maximize your ability to tap into the government. The one other thing that I would mention here is we have a field force growing of about 500 to 600 folks, to include cybersecurity advisors and cybersecurity state coordinators, who are there to provide that first line of support if there is a major incident or if there's something that goes down that they need help with. So it's not just money. You can actually tap into people on the ground that can help support you when you need it.
Great. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
So just thinking about the job for governors, you mentioned a number of things, resources, issues, threat environment, et cetera. What would be the top three things that you would recommend that we pay attention to?
I think at the end of the day, people get scared of cyber because it's seen as very technical. If you come from a background that's not an IT background, it seems very daunting. And oftentimes it seems very scary because frankly it is.
Check.
And so at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is to communicate about this topic in a way where people are not scared to death of it so that their brain shuts off. So we really take it back to the fact that, yes, ransomware and cyber threats are scary. They've become a kitchen table issue. But what we need to do is really reclaim that territory and make cybersecurity, and most importantly, cyber hygiene, a kitchen table issue. Because that's not incredibly complicated. It does sound that way because unfortunately we've created terms like multi-factor authentication that, people's eyes glaze over and they say, I can't do that. And we are working hard, and we'd love to work with the National Governors Association to develop a public service campaign so that people realize that MFA is the seatbelt of the information superhighway, and how important it is. Microsoft did a great study on this that showed that multi-factor authentication, which very simply is just another form of identification to prove that it's you logging into your email or logging into your bank account. The study that you all did said it made you 99.9% less likely to get hacked. So it's the basics like that. It's updating your software. It's replacing legacy infrastructure. It's moving to secure cloud. It's using things like password keepers so that you can have complex, unique passwords. This is not rocket science, even though sometimes it sounds like it. And so what I would ask for your help and advocacy for is to ensure that Americans across the country understand the basics that they need to keep themselves and their businesses safe. And so, we talk about the top, you asked for 3, we talk about the top 4 things, and that's very simply keeping multi-factor authentication. It's good password hygiene. It's updating your software and replacing your legacy infrastructure. And all of this information is available on CISA.gov. And we are here to be your partner to help with that, Governor. So thanks for asking the question.
Mr. Eddy.
Pleasure to be here.
Yes.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
First, thank you, Governor Lee. Thank you, Governor Lamont. And thank you, Director Easterly. Jen, it's great to see you. I can't tell you how exciting it is that someone with your background and skills is in this position. Your sense of partnership with the private sector in the States, having that deeply embedded in who you are, is why you're going to be so successful in this critical role. So I'm so glad to see you here. And thank you to the NGA. Congratulations to the NGA for all the work they did to help get the grants that Jen just mentioned, to help state and local governments train the cyber workforce to move to more secure website architectures, et cetera. So it's very exciting. I'm honored also to listen to and learn from the other panelists coming up, Merritt Bear from Amazon and Kemba Walden from Microsoft. This is truly a star-studded panel. So I'm going to be quite tight and try to give you something where I can give maybe some differentiated insights. There won't be as many bits and bytes. Before I do, I want to talk about my view of what makes a state deeply secure in the cyber domain. And I'm going to use Connecticut as an example and what Governor Lamont has done so far. First, I want to mention that on COVID, Governor Lamont made some brilliant decisions very early. Some are quite bold. As a Connecticut resident, thank you, Governor. You saved thousands of lives with that effort. And on cyber, you're doing what many states just simply need to do. You brought quality leadership into your CISO position, Jeff Brown, who you mentioned earlier, long career in the private sector, extraordinarily talented. You're centralizing your systems. You're moving people and agencies into a centralized holistic process with central security teams, central clarity on vulnerabilities, 365, 24/7 monitoring. And in this fiscal crisis of COVID, you found an $11 million extra of state money to put into the cyber domain. So thank you for doing that. I appreciate that. I feel a little more secure living here. So thanks. Two things I'll mention today quickly, and you'll wonder what they have to do with cyber, and I'll tell you. First, COVID-19 and the new normal that's coming, why that's a cyber opportunity. And secondly, the geopolitical risk, Russia, Ukraine particularly, and why that's a cyber threat and how we had to think about it. I do have some slides, and I'm going to run them myself. So excuse me if I'm a little ganky with that. Can you see that slide? No, I did that wrong. No, I didn't. Okay. Thanks so much. So first, quickly on Omicron, I want to make sure we're all very clear on this. Omicron is going to affect 45% of this country in just 2 months from the time it got here. It's the fastest growing disease in the history of the world. As you know, it's about 50% as lethal or less than Delta, but it's 30 times more transmissible than the wild strain. We have to be, as far as the mutation of this disease, it probably mutates about 6 times as rapidly as flu. So it's a rapidly mutating disease, and we have to be quite concerned about what will happen next. There's a possibility of what we consider an Omicron plus. So a highly lethal, highly transmissible variant could be out there. There are some exciting genetic reasons to say that's not likely. But all this to say, COVID-19 hopefully is going to become endemic, not pandemic. And you're going to see from the Biden administration, probably within 4 months, maybe earlier, proposals to increase parts of the public health system, including at states and local levels, to get us to a new normal where we can look at COVID as very much like any other respiratory illness. So can we get to a situation where COVID kills, and it's a horribly large number, but 50 to 80,000 people per year, which is a bad to very bad flu season? What happens at that moment, of course, is we're not in a crisis, where the hospitals aren't full, we're less masked, we have less political tension, and ideally it's, again, towards a more normal process. The Biden administration is going to propose steps to get there, and they're going to require funding lines to do so. It'll be around testing, vaccination, treatment, a variety of other things in the public health service and in the generalized health service. I propose to you that this is an opportunity because there will be real money on the table for states to modernize their public health systems, including, again, hospitals, universities, and schools inside the testing regime and the vaccination regimes. What we learned through COVID, partly Jen was mentioning, is that the data systems right now that were used for public health in the states, as well as at the CDC, were not interoperable. They had very lax security standards in many instances. So there are real arguments to make right now as these funding streams begin to be considered. So we're very early in the creation of them, but they're going to move fast, to think about adding cybersecurity dollars into that. They should be additional dollars. They shouldn't take away from the public health need, but it's a very necessary part of the public health need, and it will help you cover up some of the low-hanging fruit, the big gaps that states have right now, you meaning governors. I would just echo some of what Jen said about low-hanging fruit. A lot of states still have servers sitting in dusty back rooms that have to go to the secure cloud. That's initial capital expenditure that is brilliant as far as money spent and what it'll look like down the line. I have to mention as a footnote to Jen and others, I hope the federal government is looking very closely at redundancy of the cloud, making sure we don't have too many eggs in one basket. Do we have a spread across the different secure cloud servers as to where we have critical infrastructure? And I hope that's being done because it's obviously quite critical. The second thing I'd encourage states to do with this COVID money is to think about zero trust environments. And Jen mentioned that as well. It sounds more daunting than it is. It actually will take some time to get there, but legacy systems need to be moved to zero trust. Finally, while we're talking about COVID, and this will transition to the geopolitical risk portion I want to get to, let's just understand the value of data integrity. And inside this moment right now, where we have become deeply tribalized, deeply distrustful of leadership, deeply distrustful of the other party, the other person, in this sort of fact-free media funhouse environment in which we live, we are highly susceptible to misinformation. We know that. COVID data integrity is an area for asymmetric threat by either a foreign actor or by a non-state actor or by an activist. If you can imagine an announcement that a series of COVID PCR tests from a local hospital were flawed, and then 2 or 3 more of those being announced, that's a very simple hack. You could destroy trust in the entire COVID testing system across the country. We've all played out a similar theory around water purification. What if one water for purification plant's data was corrupted and then people began to not trust their water was clear or clean? So that would it's a small attack on data integrity that would have a huge impact on bewilderment and trust. So when you think about how to spend these dollars, realize there are asymmetric costs beyond ransomware to pay attention. So, and I'll conclude talking about geopolitical risk. It's in the headlines every day. It's part of where I spend my day, is trying to figure out, in this instance, if Russia is going to attack Ukraine or not. You can see on the board, if you can see the screen, are scenarios for likelihood, but we won't get into it. You can take a look if you'd like. Russia has shown already it can shut down the Ukrainian power grid. It's done so not once, but twice. They've shut down the Ukrainian IT infrastructure. They've shut down Ukrainian government websites. What's really relevant for you to understand here, and this is more about the possible scenarios, but what's really relevant for you to understand here is the cyber war is on right now from Russia to Ukraine, and that risk is not limited just to Ukraine. There was an attack called NotPetya. You should be quite familiar with it by now. At the time, it was the most expensive cyber attack in history, might still be. It cost billions of dollars in damage in Europe and into American companies, though it was targeted at Ukraine. And as I said, now the cyber attack is already on. Ukraine is now subject to a large DDoS attack and malware from Russia. Leakage is already detected. So US states need to begin thinking about this as a real risk. One thing I mentioned on the bottom here is if you start to play out the sequelae of this series of hostilities, if Russia does indeed go into the Donbass region and wave a flag of Russia, the United States has already promised a series of responses, largely will be sanction responses and embargo responses. What is Russia's next move? Very likely it's to increase cyber attacks. I don't know how intense they'll be, if they'll go against US critical infrastructure or not, but it's an easy move for them. They're quite capable to do so. That means US states, US private sector companies have to be taking this very seriously. We call this a trans-attack posture. We are already in a warfare state right now and need to be aware of that. I mention it, and I'll add one more emphasizing point to that, because I'm going to get to resilience. Worth noting, the Colonial Pipeline attack was not intended to shut off the gas. The JBS meat production attack, which shut down pork production, was not intended to shut down meat production. They were simply ransomware attacks intended to grab data, and they inadvertently shut down those processes. Those were non-state actors with some state support in some instances, intending to hold data for ransom, not intending to shut down critical infrastructure. So imagine what a state actor can do. If you need to create a picture in your mind of the vulnerability, understand that. And so the transition is, let's begin to think about these geopolitical risks as a clear and loud wake-up call to start thinking about what Jen was describing about increasing our resilience and preparing to operate in a degraded environment. There's a phrase I love, a word I love, called wish casting. Let's just hope that we don't get attacked. Let's hope our state does just fine under a Russian attack or a major non-state actor attack. Not a responsible way to think, and very, very likely will get you in big trouble. So consider how do you operate in a degraded state. This is not a novel idea. You may know the US Navy now is bringing sextants back on board their ships and teaching midshipmen how to navigate by the stars. They're concerned about GPS going out. States should think about that as a lesson, and what can they do to begin to prepare for a degraded state. The punchline effectively is, what has to work in your state? What can you sacrifice? And what's critical that relies on cooperation in your region? I think there's a big room here for the federal government to lead in bringing regions together to create islands of resilience. You don't want your island to be too small, or aspects of your critical infrastructure obviously won't work. Power grids being an obvious example. So again, I think the suggestion for this, understand the geopolitical risk, be relentless in your preparation for attack. Don't wish cast. Recognize that you will get a state actor after you at some point, sooner rather than later. See if you can convince the federal government to lead for regional resiliency so you can work together in a degraded environment. tabletops, training, operations like Yankee X and others, rudimentary infrastructure can help as we prepare for, unfortunately, probably nearly inevitable large attacks that will require states to operate in a degraded environment. So I'll leave it at that. And I'll thank you so much for the time I had here.
No, thank you, sir. Did you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up. I mean, always the brilliant articulation from my friend RP. Well done.
Thanks, Jen.
Just to the point on Ukraine, just want to let folks know, we are taking this very seriously as well. We have been working since the beginning of December to work with our federal partners, our state and local partners, and our industry partners to make sure that they're aware of the potential threats that could come. We've gotten information out at every level of classification to include publicly. And I would draw your attention to several advisories that we've put out, to include most recently one from last week that talks about what are the near-term things, right? Because there's a lot we can do that has a long tail to it, to include moving to the cloud and zero trust infrastructure. But we really tailored it. What are the near-term things that you can do to help shore up your security and your resilience to potential threats coming out of this conflagration? So very important to please check that out.
Thank you. Governor Grisham, welcome. I just wanted to acknowledge and so you come in, and thank you for being here. Any questions you have along the way, feel free.
This? Yes, I do. I will. Thank you very much for recognizing me, Governor. I'm sorry that I was late, but I wanted to give my colleagues over there a chance to get all their questions in first. You're welcome.
Good. So we also have with us Kemba Walden, with a senior official at Microsoft, and the private sector obviously plays an incredibly important role in this. And so I'd love to have your thoughts and comments on how we can work together. Oh, please.
Thank you, Governor Lee, for having me. Thank you, Jen. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Good. I do work for a technology company. As Governor Lee mentioned, my name is Kemba Walden. I am an assistant general counsel in Microsoft's digital crimes unit, responsible for our counter ransomware program. What the digital crimes unit is at Microsoft is relatively important and quite relevant to our conversation today. We are an international unit of attorneys like me, investigators, data scientists, business analysts that go after cybercrime in all its forms. We've been operational since 2008 with ransomware as our newest part of it. But I want to, before I start into my remarks, I just want to give you a bit of a background for me. Before Microsoft, I was at the Department of Homeland Security for 10 years, most recently as an attorney in CISA, responsible for the financial sector, the energy sector, and the elections infrastructure. So I carried that through the 2016 national elections, the 2018 midterms. And while at Microsoft, I was the attorney for what was known then as the Defending Democracy program, and carried that through the 2020 elections. And then they quickly had me pivot right before the tsunami of ransomware attacks to stand up our counter ransomware program. So this is the context from which I'm coming. So I'm going to address a couple of things in my talk. The first is sort of what can we do to prepare for a nation state attack or a non-nation state attack. And I'm going to do it through the lens of ransomware because that's sort of where we are right now. But cyber attacks occur. There are a lot of similarities for cyber attacks to occur. I'm also going to talk a bit about sort of the long game, the long-term strategy, and give you some practical ideas for how to increase resiliency. And then we're going to talk a bit more about the long game and cyber skills. In my off time, I teach cybersecurity law and policy at Georgetown and national security and cyber security at Berkeley's iSchool. So I'm going to do a little bit of a background session, if that's okay. So I just wanted to define cybersecurity to start so you can understand where I'm coming from. So cybersecurity, the way it's defined, and it's actually codified in law, is to protect the confidentiality, the integrity that RP and Jen mentioned, and availability of information. So that's your data, and the networks over which it flows, right? So we're protecting the confidentiality and integrity and availability of information and the network over which it flows. So at bottom, cybersecurity is really an exercise in mitigating risk. You're never going to get to zero. That's okay, but it's an exercise in mitigating risk and increasing resiliency. So you've heard those themes over and over again. So that's where I'm coming from and providing some solutions for you. So we've seen nation state actors mimic those of cyber criminals, and RP mentioned a few with the NotPetya incident, and then we had the 2008 incident in Georgia, the country of Georgia. But recently we've observed destructive malware deployed in the Ukraine that mimics ransomware, and really ransomware is a type of malware at the end of the day. And while this destructive malware differs from ransomware in important ways, the steps that we recommend for preparing for a ransomware attack are also relevant to protecting against many forms of cyber crime, including those executed by nation state actors. And I, because I come from CISA, I'm very victim focused, right? So I recommend that state governments and the federal government has done this too, produce clear, actionable, accessible guidance for local communities, for enterprises, for small and medium businesses. You heard Director Easterly say that critical infrastructure owners and operators are in the private sector, many of them in your states. Some of them are small businesses that feed into those. And although we have federal standards that have done an excellent job of addressing many aspects of attacks, organizations still struggle with where to start. So government guidance should be relatively simple and should state clear priorities at the outset and have a simple 3 or 4 step approach, right? Prepare your recovery plan, limit the scope of damage, and making it harder to get into the system in the first place. But before I dive into detail on those steps, those examples, let me just explain how a criminal actor, or nation state or otherwise, gets into a network, right? So you might have the initial point of penetration. That could be something as simple as a phishing email or a vulnerable VPN of some sort, virtual private network. Remote desktop protocols in this hybrid work environment can be utilized in that way. Once they get into a single computer, they will look for opportunities to lateral into a network. And so a lot of off-the-shelf tools are used to do that. So they'll lateral into a network and look to escalate privileges to like an IT administrator or something like that, someone that has a little bit more authority in the system. And so once they've done that, they might establish persistence. And they use off-the-shelf tools, commercial tools, but they also use malware to do some of this work. So they will establish persistence for one reason or another. In the ransomware case, they're going to do it to exfiltrate data and ransom the organization for money. And if they want to be more destructive, they'll use it for destructive purposes. So it's relatively simple for them to get in, right? They don't really break in. You just click on a funny little cat something and they're in. So given that, here are the steps that I recommend. And NGA was so kind to print this really, really tiny eye chart. So I apologize for that. I always look at it on my computer. I didn't realize it was formatted to be a poster. So perhaps we can send you an electronic version of it, but it gives you some ideas for what simple guidance can be. And as I go through some of these ideas, I'll address what we mean by zero trust, for example. Now this one is focused on ransomware. But like I said, it can be applicable to pretty much any cyber incident or attack, pretty much. So making it harder to get in would be one step. There are some basic cybersecurity hygiene steps that can be taken. That's multi-factor authentication. Director Easterly mentioned our study where we found that more than 99% of all cyber attacks would have been prevented with multi-factor authentication. It's important to raise the friction for entry. And there's some other things that you can do. You can control remote access. You can control provide security controls in your email. You can have a lot of endpoint security, intrusion detection systems, intrusion prevention systems. So there are lots of solutions that are sort of outlined in this little eye chart. The second thing, and I'll try to make this quick because I want Merritt to have her time too, but limiting the scope of damage will force these attackers to work harder to gain access to multiple business critical systems, right? So they'll establish persistence and try to find what's critical for whatever purpose. It might be a financial purpose, it might be a hacktivism, it might be a political purpose. But you want to be able to make it harder for them to gain access to those critical systems. So one way to do that is by implementing zero trust principles. And you've heard us talk about that a bit. So what is zero trust? And again, I'm putting on my teacher hat again. Zero trust, the zero trust model assumes breach and verifies each request as though it originates from an open network. So you just never trust, always verify. So regardless of where the request originates or what resources accesses, zero trust teaches us to never trust, always verify. Every access request is fully authenticated, authorized, and encrypted before granting access, right? So that's what we mean by zero trust. We assume breach and we operate that way. There are other things that can take place, micro segmentation of least privileged access principles. We can and implement solutions for better detection and response, like I said, intrusion detection systems or intrusion prevention systems. There are a whole host of things that local businesses or state and locals or enterprises in your state measures that they can take. And then prepare your recovery plan, right? So cybersecurity, like I said, is an exercise in mitigating risk. You're never going to get down to zero risk, but really it's an exercise in increasing resilience. And that's what preparing a recovery plan is about. So what does that mean? You keep hearing about securing backups, right? In the ransomware case, that's not all you need to do because they'll sell data once they retrieve it. But you need to secure your backups. And then you need to, or in addition to, not and then, you need to understand what your critical assets are. Where are they on your network? Unlock those down. And then there are some solutions for doing that, whether it's moving to the cloud or updating your systems, removing on-prem, that kind of thing. So that's an example of the kind of guidance that states can provide to critical infrastructures, owners and operators in their state, whether they're small and medium businesses, nonprofits, local communities, et cetera. So that's the near term. Looking long game a bit, states can also support deterrence and disruption efforts. And that's sort of the world I'm living in right now. So you can make cybercrime, for example, or cyber attacks an investigation and prosecution priority. And communicate this directive internally in your state and to the public. Important, and I heard someone mention this earlier, run statewide government-backed awareness campaigns and tabletop exercises. I can't stress the importance of not just having a plan, but exercising it and figuring out the bugs before an attack happens, before an incident happens. Stressing again, updating your cyber hygiene, if your regulations and standards in your state keep looking at those are dynamic regulations, update those, make the public aware of it. And I think Governor Lee or Governor Lamont, I'm not sure which one of you mentioned it, but increase the quality and volume of information that's shared among state and local government, your nonprofits, your owners and operators in your state. Leverage information that you have access to. Okay, so now shifting gears a little bit, I want to echo about cyber skills. It's something that I am passionate about. I teach graduate level courses, but my favorite teaching job is teaching digital safety and cyber safety to my daughter's Brownie Girl Scout troop. It's so enlightening. It's impressive to see them light up, and they're all interested in computer science now, which I'm thrilled about. But we know that in the past year, foreign governments have tampered with software supply chain, targeted on-prem servers, and hacked into sensitive government files. All criminals, cyber criminals have attacked schools and penetrated hospitals, shut down national pipelines. We're in a new era that falls short of war, where cybersecurity attacks and threatens our businesses and our healthcare and our daily lives, which RP had mentioned. And until we redress the current cybersecurity workforce shortage, we will all fall short in strengthening the country's cyber protection. Our cyber resilience depends on this. I can give you some statistics here, but like Jen mentioned, there are nearly 500,000 job openings, well-paying jobs, but only 3% of US students are securing a credential in computer and information science, and far fewer specializing in cybersecurity. So to help address this problem, last fall, we launched a 4-year campaign to help close the talent gap in cybersecurity skilling. We're targeting about 250,000 people by 2025. And our effort begins with new partnerships to support community college cybersecurity programs. Partnerships are important here. And so we're providing scholarships and additional resources to those 25,000 students, training for new and existing faculty across 150 community colleges, community practice with the American Association of Community Colleges, and curriculum and teaching materials we're providing free of charge. And in fact, yesterday, the American Association of Community Colleges announced its first cohort of grant recipients. I think there are about 14 states that were announced. So we intend to grow this campaign quickly to involve more companies and nonprofits, governments, obviously at the federal level and at the state level, and volunteers from other companies and other financial resources. It'll also work to scale its program efforts to 4-year colleges, including historically Black colleges and universities. I come from an HBCU, and Hispanic serving institutions. So hopefully through these partnerships, we'll not only touch the K-12, but the community colleges and increase resilience by increasing our cyber workforce. So I know I talk fast a bit. I know we're running short on time and I wanted to give Merritt some time, but if you have any questions, I'm happy to take those.
Merritt, why don't you jump in? That'd be great.
Thought you'd never ask.
Aha.
Thanks, folks, for being here. And I don't have talking points. I'm going to just talk as humans. Merritt there. I'm a principal in the Office of the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer at Amazon Web Services, or the cloud. Kemba and now Jen and I are veterans of CISA, and I have worked in all 3 branches of government before. And, you know, this is an issue, obviously, that is near and dear to my heart. I remember interviewing for Amazon, and when they said, do you think this job is going to be really different than working in government? I said, I always wanted to change the world, and I wanted to make it somehow more secure. Like, this is part of who I am. And I think that the unsexy part always appeals to me, which is the infrastructure. And I don't care so much about catching the bad guys. I am not an FBI or Secret Service or, you know, law enforcement mindset. I care about improving the landscape. And I consider us to be on an entrepreneurial mission. So if we actually break down and, you know, we don't have like whiteboards or raised hands here, I won't force you to do it, but like, who really knows what cloud is? Let's break it down, especially from a security perspective. So the premise of cloud is that your cloud provider, in my case, us, AWS, we're managing the bottom layers of the stack. So everything from the concrete floor up through layer 4, the hypervisor. And then you, the customer, are building on top of that, right? So you're building in the software layers. So layers 4 through 7. This is super important to a conversation like this around redundancy and around resiliency, because there are inherent security characteristics of not having servers that you need to hug, or worrying about someone plugging in a USB. If your forensics look different if you're in cloud, you're not going to get into the host. That's on our side, right? Congratulations, that's not your problem anymore as a security person. And so I think there's a lot of beauty there as an organization to be able to move into thinking through how we're going to be entrepreneurs in a cloud era. And what I mean by that is that now that we're talking about those higher layers of the stack, and a side note, our infrastructure layers are really interesting. We have a Nitro ecosystem that, for example, has kind of like a hypervisor-less hypervisor. So everything is doing, hot patching, and we are running during updates, and like there are inheritances that you receive as a customer by virtue of being on our platform. And that includes diversification and the kinds of ways that we have architected for high availability ourselves on our side with region design and redundancy that you can also contribute to through your own region choices. So as we think through those, I want to talk through what it looks like to do some of the types of work that we're talking about. Like, there is no one product that is zero trust. And if someone's trying to sell that to you, don't buy it. We conceive of zero trust ourselves as something like reducing, possibly down to zero, the relevance of an actor's position within your network. And that actor could be a human, or it could be a piece of software. And so thinking through how we don't make it a binary choice between identity-centric fine-grained positions like VPCs and, identity permissions, so IAM and permissioning around that, and a choice between things that are perimeter centric, so VPNs and VPCs. And so a metaphor here would be like, you don't choose between putting guards outside your door and having some permissions that are like, we don't turn the TV on if it's a Tuesday night. So we couple those together, right? And so that looks more like that. But on a technical layer, we're doing that anyway. And there's a lot of beauty that one inherits from that. So for example, every API call goes over the open internet. It's protected by SIG-V4 with no inherent trust. But there's a lot of relevance to the ways that we think through our security protocols. And so as we get closer to something, what I really urge us to do is worry less about every particular intruder and worry more about building the house right. Like, let's make this part of the reasons that we do business in the first place. Let's migrate because it's the right thing to do. I am going to take a principled stance against RP Eddy's admonishment that we should diversify clouds. From a security perspective, I disagree. Pick a cloud and go all in, because your operators will understand your environment. They will not have to learn multiple environments. There's fewer rogue, operators and assets. So my admonition would just be to get in, use it as a business driver. Security is a business inheritance and it matters. It's not just for the idea that it's like a cost center is so outdated. This is a product that we are delivering, and it is part of everything you are delivering. So when you deliver policy, when you ensure that people can show up to the polls, when you ensure that people can access health resources, security is an attribute of that. And so we don't, and whether you're a healthcare company or a retailer, everyone is in this business now. And it's really core to that, but I want to see it as a driver. I am optimistic. I think we are enablers. I think we are the shop of yes. And I think we can do that increasingly more when we move into those infrastructure as code. We can do security as code. We can know what we have done. There's a lot of beauty in this articulation. And on the workforce side, as we know, there's a lot of work to be done, but I see a lot of room there, because we're talking about hiring folks who don't look like traditional security. Forget that, right? And get there. And we joke internally that we hire lazy security engineers because we want them to never want to solve the same problem twice. You codify it away if it can be codified. And if it can't, then we turn it into known versus unknown risk. It becomes part of the fabric of your mechanisms. And there's a quote from one of our VPs, Eric Brandwine, who says, if it's not someone's job, it's a hope. And a hope is not a plan. It's gotta be owned. And we believe in that deeply. I encourage you to have state CISOs who then are given the articulation and the executive leadership to be a contributor to your state's growth. These are issues that are not just about guarding the gates. They are about enabling ourselves and being part of that move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's right. It's not just about securing the gates. It is about expanding everything that we do in our states. Thank you. We're actually about out of time. I would like to open it up though for any comments or questions folks have to our.
I make a clarifying comment quickly.
Yep.
Merritt, I thought that was fantastic. Thank you very much for sharing all that. Just to clarify what I was saying, and it's important the states understand this. I'm not suggesting that states diversify their cloud providers. I'm asking that the federal government ensure that different parts of the U.S. critical infrastructure are not huddled or housed into one cloud or the other. We've seen Microsoft and AWS and others go down for hours. At some point, one will go down for a week, perhaps if something horrible happens. Let's make sure from the federal level, we're clear that massive aspects of our critical infrastructure are not put into one cloud. So I just want to clarify what I was saying. And I hope that makes sense compared to what you were saying. Thanks for your points.
Yeah, it makes sense. And you can architect for high availability and budget for that. And, in any of these clouds. And it makes sense to do that as any smart, in that CIA triad, right? I think availability gets too little airtime. And I'm a big fan. Who's going to do anything if it doesn't run? So I think it doesn't necessarily need to consist of separate clouds, but you should make plans for availability and redundancy for sure.
Thank you. Questions, governors, comments?
I might make one, Governor, if I can. So what I know about cybersecurity and information technology is nothing.
You might know the acronym of CISA.
I do. And
You might even know how to pronounce it.
that's because we have good staff who make sure that that's written for us
Exactly.
before we walk in the room. But I am struck by all of the presenters identifying that it doesn't have to be as complicated as lots of us have made it, but you have to pay attention. And in that paying attention and having real executable plans, I was struck by your tabletop exercise aspects. I'm curious what states can be doing, particularly from where we're obligated and want to protect all the privacy requirements. Take HIPAA for an example. But as we then overlay is probably not the right word, but as we're investing in upgrading our technology systems, understanding that we have cybersecurity. Anytime we do anything, we're inviting some amount of risk as we do that. Don't want to minimize any of those protections, but we want something that works a little better together. And you, a couple presenters even mentioned, without being so specific, we still can't get the kind of state data that we need out of Tiberius. And so where they're interoperable, where they're going to make sense, how do we do that? How can states play a role so we get what we need? We're improving our own systems. We're part of the security solution, but we need to be working together on how that is going to look and what the expectations are for us to get there more effectively. I hope that makes some kind of sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to take a stab. Teammates can weigh in too. Just going back to the point about a lot of folks are not cybersecurity IT savvy at the end of the day. Leaders have to understand that this is not something that is the purview of the IT guys or girls anymore, right? At the end of the day, this is a leadership responsibility. And that's why so important that we who are of the security and technology community make sure that we are communicating in ways that everybody can understand. One of the tools that we have on our website that I think are enormously helpful for state and local and our tribal and territorial colleagues is called Cyber Essentials. And it breaks it down for all of our stakeholders to understand at a very basic level the things that you need to be doing to keep your systems and your data and your networks safe and secure. And so again, it sort of goes to the basics. And one of the basics that we talk about in the guide that we just put out to enable response is in fact making sure that we are exercising all of our playbooks and plans. So I can't emphasize that enough of, and I don't know if NGA has come together and done a tabletop exercise against a significant cyber threat, because at the end of the day, it's very likely that one attack is going to manifest in another area because everything is connected these days in technology. So you can't isolate things in terms of one sector or another. Everything is essentially a national critical function. So you have to think about it in a multi-sectoral way, and you have to think about it in a multi-state way. And so if you haven't done it already, I think it would be great to come together and walk through a scenario about there's a major cyber attack that's taken out this system, and this is what we're going to do about it. Here are the resources we can draw on it. Because I think it's really important to just sort of pull on the point that RP mentioned. You look at Colonial Pipeline. That was not intended necessarily to do what it did. It was a ransomware attack where they were looking to get paid. But at the end of the day, what the threat actors saw was that they could actually shut down a gas to the Eastern Seaboard for a period of time and cause a lot of chaos and anxiety against the American people. And so think about what an intended attack could do. And so we really need to get ahead of exercising our plans and our playbooks and making sure, frankly, that the experts at the state and local level, your CISOs, your infrastructure people, have the resources that they need to be successful and are able to draw on experts from the federal government. As I mentioned, we have cybersecurity advisors, cybersecurity state coordinators across the country. We work very closely with our industry colleagues who bring a lot to this. And so I would just say, reach out if there are any questions at all. We are here to help. We are here to partner and make what seems like a daunting and overly technical world a little simpler so that you know what you need to do to be able to protect your state.
I really appreciate that. My question was more focused on the federal government working with us in a more strategic way on some of the areas that are more difficult. So we have a cybersecurity center of excellence. We're investing in institutions of higher education. We're revamping the way state government works in the context of the threat, doing exactly what you said, moving away from just the IT folks and having a different set of leadership skills, taking a look at that. But as we do more, and we should, seems to me that there might be, and I like the tabletop exercise idea by the NGA. That's very helpful. Thank you. But for you all to think about ways for the states to support the federal government and vice versa, so that as we are doing both, dealing with our serious security threats. We just had a school system shut down, so I can't think of a state that hasn't had to deal with it in some context or another. And certainly our own data has been compromised, just like the private sectors. But in addition, as we do upgrades and invest, there are some connections about data sharing or the lack thereof that we ought to be working, it seems to me, more collaboratively. And I'm sure I'm missing something, but I'd be very interested at a later date to think about ways that we can all do a better job and I can be more effective in supporting the federal government's role here and the private sector.
Yeah, I'd love to have that follow-up conversation.
great.
I think that would
Thank
be
you. And
really
thanks
good.
for-
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Governor.
Yeah, and Governor Lamont, I'll say I think that this is an opportunity, what Governor Grisham's talking about, for NGA to engage in ways that our states and governors can build on the relationship with the federal government partners and private sector partners to enhance what we're doing. All of us have experts in our states that are engaged and that are working to secure and to protect our our assets there, but we can enhance that. And I think this NGA work can do that.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. I agree. We've got some follow-up to do. Thank you for teaching us how to say CISA. We really appreciate that.
I wish
Kemba,
I heard
you
the
gave
debate
me-
in the hallway about how to pronounce it before I came in.
Kemba, you gave us some hope. 99% of these intrusions can be stopped with a multi-factor authentication. I'm just afraid it's going to be so complicated that bad actors won't be able to get into the system, and neither will I. But so we'll have to figure out how we do that. And then RP gave me something I think we ought to follow on, Bill. I always think about the greatest risk to cyber attacks, systemic risk, utilities and things like that, broadly done, but also the attack upon trust. When he mentioned you can take on a local water system and take on its filtration system and the risk and fear that that creates, or, close to home, you take down our Department of Revenue Service and the information is spilled out there, nobody pays taxes. So I think it would be helpful as follow-ups. What is the low-hanging fruit, those things that might be the most vulnerable and the easiest to protect that have real ramifications? Appreciate your help, everybody.
Yeah, and one other question I would have, and not to be answered right now, but what you see are the biggest mistakes that either states and or local entities make? You outlined the things that we can do to protect, and what I think it would be, and this would be information we can spread and share to governors through this committee. You see a lot of what happens in states, and in that weakest link that I talked about earlier, what do you see the most of that we can communicate with our advisory councils, for example, in Tennessee, or our all of the stakeholders that are involved in this? That'd
Can
be
I just give
helpful.
you a quick
Yeah,
gut
I'd love a
answer
quick
on
answer.
that? And so this isn't my combined experience. I've seen the biggest mistake that states don't know who controls or owns a part of a network, right? Everything's interconnected. Understanding your network and what your most valuable assets are and where they are, I think that having gaps there, that's the biggest mistake from my personal experience.
It's good.
Mhm.
Mayor, I take exception with your fact that you said that, let's see, how did you say it? It's infrastructure is unsexy? Yeah. I'm a mechanical, no, I'm a
Are you saying
mechanical
it's
engineer, and I
sexy?
worked in the water and sewer and mechanical
Yeah.
infrastructure. I think it's very sexy. I like it. I don't know anything about cybersecurity, but
I do
infrastructure
think
is
that
sexy.
large distributed problems matter. Like if you do low probability, high, impact, most folks are not looking at that. And that's where the pandemic and cyber risk
Yeah.
meets, right?
Yeah.
At the same time, I think just a last kind of clarification here where I think, a lot of what I have been interested in are at these enterprise or entity level. I'm not talking about like whether your grandma clicks on a phishing link. Your grandma, when she clicks on the phishing link, is relying on some of the guardrails that entity has put in place, right? Is she on a VPN? Is she in a corporate network? And so a lot of these, like, again, I'm going to come back to Brandwine. He's not going to necessarily like this, but when folks say, what keeps you up at night? He's like, nothing. If it comes down to me, then we've got bigger problems. Like, it should be the kind of inheritance that we have democratized down, right? Let's make good behaviors something that we can replicate and that we can live with, and that we don't just put hope on.
Great.
Thank you.
RP, Kemba, Jen, Merritt, thank you very much for your help, and thank you all for being here. We will adjourn.